All right. Good morning. Want to welcome all of us and anyone else joining us to the Early Learning Council meeting on November 19th, 2024. And Gabby, I'll ask you to call the roll if you would.
Yeah, of course. Chair Miller, you are here. Katie Brooks,
I'm here.
Peter Buckley,
Here.
Barry Ford is excused, Elizabeth Farrar Campbell,
I'm here.
Robin Hill Dunbar,
Here.
Dr. Peg Miller,
Here.
Subin O,
Here.
Ruby Ramirez is excused, and Marie Simons.
Here.
All right.
And we have quorum, Sue.
All right. Thank you, Gabby. So we're going to open today with accepting public testimony. As we all know, we have received one written testimony from Brandy McGarva. And I think on behalf of the council, I want to thank her for sending her comments in. Obviously, she's sent a very thoughtful email with many suggestions around early learning. And we'll be sure to call attention to her input for the Department of Education and make sure that they see her suggestions. Certainly those working on the governor's early literacy initiative will be interested to hear her thoughts. I think we all appreciate her recognition of children who have special needs, especially behavioral health issues. And that is, of course, a priority of the council. And then I wanted to just say, we certainly agree with her closing statement where she said, we have to put kids first. So we are all on the same page with that statement, Brandy. Is there anyone else who wishes to address the council, Gabby, that you know of?
Nope, we did not receive any requests to give verbal comment or any other written comment. And the written comment will be posted online in our meeting materials.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, council, this meeting is totally devoted to follow-up from our retreat and figuring out what do we want to at least start thinking about what our work plan for 2025 might look like. And as I said in an email, or in the materials in front of us, what staff and the Harriet and Carrie from Build and I have tried to do is to capture the primary points that were made at our retreat and use that as the foundation of building really an agenda for us for the coming year. And also, I think it's important that we give some thought, maybe some priority to the idea of where can we make a difference as a council. And then also there may well be pieces of this where some of us will individually want to play a really important or strategic role, even if it doesn't end up being a focus for the council as an official body. So just some parameters to think about as we go into this conversation. And I appreciate the fact staff has put this together in two different formats, the sort of narrative piece, which are obviously just summary statements, and then trying to lay it out so that it aligns with the roles that the council has, which we also discussed at the retreat, and see which, and we can talk about whether we all agree with where the check marks are in the matrix, if those are the roles that we would want to play on the various actions that are laid out. And I want to thank Alyssa for joining us in this conversation. We appreciate you making time for this as well. And Carrie can certainly join in as well. So with that, I will just open it up for discussion, and whatever your thoughts are about what's in front of you, where you want to focus, where you think the council could focus, where can we make a difference in 2025? And a piece of this, as you look at the matrix, the column where it has meetings, those check marks are going to really provide sort of a guide for how we set up our agendas for 2025. So that column will be important as staff and I work to put the agendas together for the coming year. Just sort of a heads up on that. I think the champion column, which has a lot of check marks in it, a large piece of that, I think in the next 6 months will be legislative action and connecting with legislators as well as testifying probably at hearings. So with that, let's go. Robin, thanks for putting your hand up. And then Subin.
Sure. And I just want to note that, are we going to still talk about housing in a bigger discussion? Because that was on the agenda too.
Right. Or you can talk about it now. You can, yes.
Well, I will jump in where your prompt is around the priorities and the two different formats, which I appreciated, the table and the written, to kind of look at what was distilled from our conversations at the retreat. Really appreciated how it was laid out so that I could think about our roles and the priorities as the governing body. The way that you all worded it really helped me think about it. And I'm going to come at it from a direction that may or may not be helpful. But what I saw is 3 areas: behavioral health, childcare, and early learning, with housing being the topic areas. And then the other were more functions to me. So the cross-sector partnership was our first area. And it had a lot of really great information too, stood out to me especially. But when I thought about the behavioral health, housing, and early childhood care and learning, I thought all of those topics that we look at as a council, the mechanism or the lens that we use should be around cross-sector partnerships. So it's sort of like the modality of how we look at any of the issues. However, there might be an overarching, like we're always looking at what are the topics that are in Raise Up Oregon that really deserve the cross-sector lens. But when we're talking about simplifying all that's in these documents and really nailing down topics, I saw behavioral health, early childhood care and learning, and housing. The Raise Up Oregon progress was the last category. And I feel like, again, that is similar to the cross-sector. We should be utilizing progress and progress reports on each of the categories that we choose if we chose those 3 areas. And then finally, the check boxes. I had some nuances that I would add in terms of tracking and reporting, and I certainly can expand on those, but maybe I'll let others speak before I do that. But that's what stood out to me under the 3 areas. If I just had one more second, just under the 3 areas, the first one under behavioral health, which is really highlight state community partnerships to improve behavioral health children prenatal to age 5 and families. That was a really great statement. And the other things that were under that seemed like subcategories rather than like its own individual thing to focus on. And then that's what I'll say, because housing, I didn't have enough information to expand, and I was hoping that we would have that discussion today. Under the childcare and early learning, the one that I thought was a priority was under supporting DELC, but then I really wanted to talk about, because cross-sector is our focus, what are the ways that we both support DELC in supporting childcare and early learning at the appropriate role of the Early Learning Council, but also how do we look at the other sectors and their possible role, as we know that childcare and early learning is a perfect example of cross-sector needs. And so that one lended itself well. I think that's it. Thank you.
Got it. So Robin, and don't worry, we've got 2 hours, so don't feel like this is it's not the normal pressure that we have in it. ridiculous agenda. So do you want to make comments about housing now, or do you want to wait, Robin? It's up to you.
I'll wait till we dig into housing. I didn't know if there would be more information shared today, but I have other thoughts when it comes to housing too.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Robin. Suben.
I have a way less helpful comment.
Oh, great, Suben.
And it's very self-centered.
Huh?
As I've mentioned before, as you all know, I'm participating in the SICC as well as the Early Childhood Suspension Expulsion Prevention Program advisory group. And I'm wondering about how many of us are kind of doing like work outside, but related, tangential to like the council work. And so I see it in here. I see it named in here, but I wonder about, for example, do we still need to have advisory group updates in our council meetings? And, what about the SICC? I feel like these are two worlds that are disconnected right now. Like I shared at our retreat in informal conversations that sometimes I feel at a loss in terms of like what I should be doing in the SICC. Although I did get really great advice from Carrie and Harriet about, what my role should be. And as a minor update, there is an opening for the executive committee for the SICC. I have no time or ability or capacity, but I'm gonna find a way. I'm gonna join that executive group to try and make this connection better between SICC and the Early Learning Council. But therein lies my problem, which is my plate in terms of like service, right? Just grows and grows and grows. And so, and it could grow even, I've said no way more than I've said yes in terms of, taking on more, subcommittees and things like that. So, anyways, just wanted to kind of share where I'm at personally in terms of the work.
Okay. Thanks, Suben. And let me just say in response to your comments, staff and I have been working on trying to put together some guidelines around council members' participation in different groups. The SICC is, by statute, we have a position on that. So it's very definitely a formal council representation on that body. And I want to thank you for saying yes to that, and now yes to their executive committee as well. I thought you just said you could say no, but it doesn't sound like you've figured that out quite yet.
Well, I think the main reason I said yes is because I kind of heard what Carrie and Harriet were saying, and I think the minimum thing that I could really do with the maximum impact is set a course within the SICC where they are paying attention to Raise Up Oregon, because I wouldn't say the SIC has any real awareness around what Raise Up Oregon is trying to do and how it fits in. And so I think that would be, because what the executive committee does is it sets the agendas for those meetings. And so that would be my contribution to that space.
Okay, thanks. Thanks. So that's an example where it's definitely an official council representative sitting on a body. And then there are several others, and your example of suspension, expulsion, prevention advisory committee is one where we haven't been mandated to have a representative. And in fact, I'm not sure we've even been requested to have an official council representative. So probably in that case, you're there as an expert, a thought partner. And yes, it's certainly a council priority, but we haven't officially appointed you or been asked to appoint you. So you're raising a really important distinction there. And, we've got the Home Visiting System Committee with Peter and Peg, and that's very official. We've appointed them, and it's our committee. So staff and I have been working, trying to put a document together for us to look at our December board meeting, trying to sort of identify these various types of council involvements in other boards, committees, commissions, and many of us are on, other local committees and commissions or workforce boards, whatever, with our own hats and our own expertise. And we don't sit there as a council representative, although we may well want to say we're on the council just to have that connection made informally. So we're working on that and would love any additional conversation or input on that. Peter.
Thanks, Sue. So in the cross-sector partnership work, I was hoping we might be able to add the upstream initiative to the family preservation initiative, et cetera. The upstream initiative, that's cross-sector in every region that's doing the design pilots. And then this is a kind of to the side, but I just don't want to lose track of the fact that we did have a good discussion about possibility of having a hub director as an ex officio member of the council. That's more of an action step than a strategy, but we had talked about that. I just don't want to make sure we don't lose sight of it.
Okay. Great, thanks. Thanks, Peter. Yes, Marie.
Sue, as I read through this and listened to my fellow council members talk here, I guess what's sort of in my mind right now is that we've been through, as new council members, and I know there's, I think, 5 of us that were new this past year. We joined all of you on this, year-long learning journey about what Raise Up Oregon was, and we heard from the agency directors, and so we did a lot of learning in this what I would consider sort of this first introductory year. And as I read through some of our priorities and sort of in reflection of our conversation at the retreat, what I hear is what I think what Robin was saying is we have a couple of like big topic areas, and what I feel like I'm really interested in throughout this next year is sort of within the behavioral health or even, childcare early learning, and what Peter just said about upstream initiative, I guess I'm really interested in hearing from the who is doing the work in the system and how they are bringing cross-sector partnerships and Raise Up Oregon and how they are bringing this to bear in their work and maybe how they are reflecting in their practices with our end users. All of these ideals and best practices and all of the things. So that's what I'm sort of envisioning throughout this next year in terms of how to take, sort of these priorities, Raise Up Oregon, and translate that into what a council meeting is and sort of what we're hoping to hear, digest, and then provide some feedback on.
Okay. Yeah, great points, Marie. And, you're raising an issue, and Peter kind of did in his comments of these boxes, these topics that we're looking at are really the high level, and they aren't down at so who's doing it, who's implementing it, Marie, which is the point you're making. And certainly Upstream Initiative is one example of an amazing cross-sector project that is definitely on the ground and making a difference. So at some point, yes, we're going to have to get to that next level of who and how. We just don't have that here, but the comments you're making today are going to help us determine, who are some of those players out there that we want to make sure we include in council meetings and some of our own outreach work. So great comment. Great comment.
And maybe, may I make one follow-up to that?
Sure.
In the example of the Upstream Initiative work that we heard from Peter's area, it's impressive and it's cross-sector and it's all the things I think that it sounds like that's what everyone's sort of hoping for, right? That we're hoping to bring that across the state. So not only do we hopefully continue to hear from the people sort of doing that work and how they're making that happen, but how do we ensure that other people who may be sort of the ones that we're hoping might model that in other areas of the state, is there an opportunity for them to come and listen at the meetings when the people are presenting to us who aren't the implementers, right? We're the
Right.
ones like, yes, this is great. It's cross sector. Let us ask more questions about how your, departments are working together. But at the end of the day, like, it's really nice and great for me to know that, but it would be awesome if the folks from around the state on the ground in similar positions could also be invited to attend and listen and learn. I don't know how that might play out, but that to me sort of feels like a little bit of the secret sauce. It's nice that we get to hear it as council members, but really, as if we're hoping to mirror things like upstream initiative around the state, like who needs to be at the table when we hear it? So maybe there's a little bit of efficiency of time. Who needs to be at the table so that they can start thinking about, oh wow, if we did it like that in our area, that's what it might look like. And oh, that would be great. We should reach out to so and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, boy, that right. Cross fertilization is just so, possible, the ramifications. And I'm guessing that our hubs can be one of the vehicles for that. And certainly something we probably would like to explore with them and with staff. I know Alyssa's staff, Maria and Nancy, have been trying to figure out how to hubs share their positive stories. So that may be one other vehicle. Let me go to Liz first, Subin, and then we'll go to you. Hi, Liz.
Hi. So I just had an idea I wanted to throw out related to the housing priorities since we
Mhm.
just have one. I think it would be to kind of piggyback off of some of the comments about that Marie just made about bringing in the people who are actually implementing. I would love to have like one of our meetings be around housing and specifically bringing in developers who have successfully done co-location, possibly with like panelists of providers who are doing the providing in those co-location, to maybe lift up examples of where it's working. I can think of one specifically in LeGrand that is just getting off the ground. But I think it would be helpful for our state agency partners to hear directly from those developers on what's working, where the pinch points are, things like that, so we can kind of identify, as we're also advocating to the legislature to put more funding into this co-location, to make sure that all of our rules and regulations and things like that are as smooth as possible if we're successful in getting additional funding. So I would offer that up as something maybe to add under the housing specifically.
Great suggestion, Liz. Thank you. And I appreciate your specificity on that. Yeah, it's interesting. I had a great conversation with the director of Housing and Community Services, Andrea Bell, last week. And she was saying, let us know how we can support the council's work, and we'll let you know how we, the council, can support their work. So the opening is there, and certainly the interest from Director Bell. Subin and then Katie.
I was just reflecting on the things that Marie was sharing is I too would really love to hear from people like on the ground closer to the work and I recognize how hard that is to fit that into council meetings. One thing that I want to say is because our council agendas are always so tight, I think sometimes people come in and they present and they feel like they need to share everything that's great, everything that's working really well. And where I think, yes, we need to hear that. That is very helpful to us. And we also need to hear where the tensions are and where the issues are. And that's where I think we actually generated the most conversation during the retreat, was talking about the issues. And I know this is always a challenge, but somehow, some way, I think the council does need space to talk about those things when they do come up. And I recognize that that's a facilitation challenge. The second thing that I wanted to say, and this fits in with me around kind of championing, this is more of a strategy than it is something that maybe shows up on this table. Kali mentioned something like this before she left the council. I feel like there should be a comm strategy with the council. Like there should be something where when we're hearing great stories or when we hear something that the field needs to know about, we need to know a way to disseminate. So right now we're talking about how do we bring hubs in, or how do we bring, people who need to hear these stories into the meetings. And that would be part of a comm strategy, but I also think there's a dissemination kind of thing that we need to talk about.
Yeah, yeah, good points, Subin. And I thought it was great that Alyssa's comms director, Kate, was at the retreat with us. So she's drafted a great article for the Delk newsletter about the retreat. So Kate has good background now on us, and I think could help with that. So good points. And the second thing I think on the matrix is third thing, distribute communications materials. That's quite broad, obviously, but several of your comments are feeding into that. And I think especially in a legislative session, trying to, put some specifics around that could be very helpful. So good points. Katie, hi, good to see you.
Hi. Well, part of what I was going to say, Subin just said, but put a little bit more meat on that. So if we are tasked in our group with bringing forth examples of success and private public or cross-departmental, somehow having a communication method or a receptacle for those ideas, along with contacts and just some of the salient points for distribution to all the departments that we work with as examples for a couple of reasons. First of all, so that we can share this internally. Here are some examples of some things working on the ground, and a lot of those ideas might come from those departments themselves. And also to have some sort of way of communicating it externally, just to generate ideas and collaborations out in the community, because I feel like we hear a lot and it goes into the ether and it's never spread around. And if we're going to do something, we got to share what we know. So whatever vehicle that looks like. And I also feel like, not always, but there should be some opportunities, not just to talk about where our areas of focus are, but I guess, for lack of a better way to explain it, some recommendations. So one of the things that's really nuanced with this group that I've found, at least, unless I'm misreading it, is who we are is a blobbable glue in the state of connecting all of these departments around this issue. But we really don't have, I don't particularly feel empowered. I don't. And that bugs me. And I think that there's an appropriate level, because I am not an expert on any of this, but I do make observations of what's going on out there. And I would like to give direction or recommendations or something along those lines. For an example, just off the top of my head, identify pathways for legislation and streamlined permitting and regulations for creating more housing, co-located housing and childcare around affordable housing, or around mid-market, or around UGB expansions, something along those lines, that we're saying this is an area that we are seeing from across the state and from across all of these agencies that we really need to focus on, and to do it in a manner that isn't disruptive, that's productive, would be great for me. Because just going back to, I know Marie and I share this, of generating more childcare. It's like treading water. And I don't know if we can fix it or not, but it would sure be nice to be able to make a statement somehow that is taken somewhere as an expectation or a recommendation?
I think there is space for that. I think with that particular example, one of the major challenges is the solutions don't lie within housing or DELC's jurisdiction.
Right.
So we can work on lifting up the barriers and convening community partners to say, here's the challenges have been. And then you have to take that to DLCD or DCBS, which are not on the council. So I think then that comes back to the really important role of building relationships and influencing, because there, as ELC maybe chooses to build relationships with those organizations or spends effort in helping them understand the important role they play in the system, even though they don't see themselves in the system, the same way the council has helped ODHS and OHA and all the other partners see themselves in the system. I think that's where we see the change. But we're observing this right now with the House Bill 2727 work group. No one thinks it's their responsibility to fix it. And the recommendations trend towards, well, Child Care Licensing Division just needs to figure out how to help people navigate our systems, which is not reducing barriers. So I think, and that's this specific example. I think there are probably other places where we do have the right agencies at the table to make adjustments. And I think it's appropriate to ask us to explore or make recommendations, recognizing we're also the ones that are going to know where there's federal limitations or other barriers that we don't have the authority to ignore.
Yeah, thanks, Alyssa. And Katie, thanks for your comments. Yeah, communications is going to obviously be something we're really going to want to try to be creative about. What are our options and who are our audiences and how do we get to them, etc. Robin.
Thank you. And thank you, Katie, for your comments. It was reminding me of when we saw the presentation by Oasis, and it was a very clear example of them trying to navigate and finding these barriers or rules that were getting in the way. And so if we, to Katie's point, we take in a lot of information, but what do we do with it? And how can we make progress on something? I was thinking, if in our innovation that comes from the community to illustrate what they're doing with an issue, whether it's behavioral health or early childhood education, co-location, if we have, this is an area I think Carrie and Harriet help us with, is if the prompts are about telling us what works and how they're working across agencies, but always also sharing what got in the way along the way, what continues to get in the way along the way. And if it's, for example, co-location, and while we might not have the authority or governance over other bodies, if we did have that communication piece, which I understand is a capacity and there's other barriers for us, but if we could manage the communications capacity, could we put together one-pagers recommendations for the governor's office? Because the governor's office could potentially influence these other places. And then we would have influence in both lifting up the issues and the barriers, and then making specific call outs and letting someone who does have the power make some change. And so it just seems like that might be a really empowered way for us to work.
And I think that's happening already, building off that, Robin. Like, I think I recognize, Katie, how it can feel really disempowering that you all feel like rules are where your power starts and stops, and we all love rulemaking. But I do think we've actually seen the effects of the influence of Raise Up Oregon and this council in the way our agency partners show up and engage, and getting that chance to spend time with our REACT team in Philadelphia last week. Like, we're having conversations we could not have 4 years ago. Folks are excited and creative and thoughtful. And so I think you're right, Robin. I think the council's made a lot of strides in setting the stage for what the early childhood system is and the role that these key agency partners have to play. And I think you're well positioned to expand, and we can build on some of the legislation like House Bill 2727 that's saying, hey, DLCD, you also have a role to play in this system. DCBS, when you pass rules about home-based childcare, you're influencing the system. And you are a governor's council, and we know the governor wants to know what you all think should be part of a broader vision and agenda. So I agree. I think if the recommendations, if agencies were asked to identify the barriers, even if we don't have the solutions because it's out of our jurisdiction, lifting up those barriers in a concise way for folks to understand will help move the needle and kind of call the question. So I think that's right. And I think to the capacity point, it is DELC that provides all the staffing and capacity for the council, working with huge support from Build, that, we don't fully resource ourselves. And Kate has to be our comms director for DELC. And I think we've also recognized for DELC that we're not doing enough of telling our own story. So I do want to acknowledge there are going to be some limitations to how much of her team's energy can be focused on promoting council vision and goals, because we're not talking about suspension and expulsion prevention enough. And there's a lot to talk about ERDC.
Yes. Okay, good point. Reality check. So Peter, I hope you're going to respond to.
Right, just to build off what Robin was talking about with the folks with Oasis. Sue and I were able to arrange a meeting with Dave Baden at OHA and some of his staff and the Oasis folks. Great meeting, and Dave could not have been more proactive and encouraging. And they are going to address the issue that Oasis brought up in terms of the use of peer support specialists and their kind of team integrated approach. OHA is very supportive of that. So that's an example of kind of what we're talking about. If the council gets to hear from people on the ground what's happening with them, both the good stuff, but also the barriers, and if we have the relationships through our colleagues on in the state agencies to be able to go to them and say, can we put together a meeting? Can we address this? Try to get this resolved. This is one example where it is actually going to work out well. And I know the Oasis folks want to follow up with this. There are a number of different entities doing this kind of integrated care that are running into administrative rules that have kept recovery programs siloed from medical programs. And if there's a way that we can actually work on these issues together so that works very well for both recovery programs and medical programs, that they can integrate and be more effective in their work, it's a positive for everyone. So just want to report that is happening. That's ongoing. There should be a paper out in December addressing the particular issue that Oasis brought up and hopefully resolving that particular issue. And there should be hopefully additional discussions going on about what other issues can we help to address to make sure we do get team-based integrated care for children and families.
Yeah, it was a very exciting, positive meeting with a tangible outcome. So they aren't always going to end like that, I'm guessing, but it was a great example. And Peter, I appreciate you putting the players and the dots together so that could happen. And as always, Dave Baden was just an amazing partner. I mean, he's just always there for us. So thanks. Marie.
I just wanted to go back to, some of the thoughts that Alyssa shared about sort of like what's inside of the ability and purview of DELC and what is under their limitations. And I guess part of what I'm hoping to maybe learn in 2025, especially around the childcare and early learning objective, is what is inside the authority of DELC to change and work on. Again, to Katie's point, like if we bring these issues forward and then we feel like we're not sure where they go from there, that feels very challenging from somebody who's in the community and people are, oh, you're on the early learning council, my gosh, here's what's happening and can you help? And it's kind of like, I don't know what to say when they say that, to be honest. So it would be really great to understand, like, what are the things that are sort of like already in statute or already in your work plan that DELC is moving forward? And is there an opportunity for us to learn about the progress that they're making? And then I would say, if there are those limitations, and my guess asterisks to that would be that are not funding related as well, right? Like, what are the rules that need to be addressed in order for us to make the kind of changes in the system that I think we're talking about in this objective? Like, how do we elevate that? Because if that is our only opportunity for actual input, like, how do we do that? Again, I feel like last year was learning, at least for me, it was a lot of learning. And while I continue to learn and love to learn, I am also a doer just by nature. And so I would love to feel at the end of, oh wow, the council did something. And I could name that really specifically, or like, we had these conversations and it resulted in something specific. And so, you know, okay, I'm gonna stop there.
Thanks, Marie. Subin.
To Marie's point, I'm thinking about it in a slightly different way. This is something that I've been dreaming about for like the last 2 years, which is I wish there was a list. I wish there was a list of the investments, how much money has been spent, where the progress is, whether it's a Gantt chart or something that shows things that are in startup phase, things that, and I would love to get an understanding of where is the money going, what are the statuses of all the various things that are being invested in, similar to this document that we're looking at, which has it in narrative form, and then we have a table, right? And I think it's going to be a combination of different data formats, right? For us to be able to really understand where is the money going. And that to me will make it feel like, okay, this is the system. Here, at least we got a grasp on what the system is, and we know where the barriers are, we know where the disconnections are, we know what needs to be connected. And I recognize something that we've been talking about that makes it way more challenging is cross-sector. Like, where does it stop and end? But I think at minimum, if we just started with what's within DELC, right? If we just started with that, I think that would help us to be able to say, to Marie's point, like at minimum, I think we can make connections that are currently not happening, because that I think is a big theme that I've felt in DELC is these things are supposed to be connected, right? Or this is supposed to be talking to that thing, right? And so I don't know whether it's in the Raise Up Oregon data dashboard or whatever it is. I would love something like that. And I also know Raise Up Oregon helps within that, but that's more like a plan, and it doesn't really name it in the way that I'm talking about, like as a list. There was another point. Oh, this is not nearly as helpful. Is the SICC? I'm hearing, Alyssa, your comms team, they've got their work cut out for them. They probably have a work plan that's, really full. I'm not saying this is the best way, but what the SICC does is they have a subcommittee that meets. They have little breakouts during their council meetings, and I'm not saying we should do this, but they have breakouts in their council meetings, and so the different subcommittees get to meet. One of those subcommittees is the governor's report. So every council meeting, they work on what could be recommendations or data that they're reporting back to the governor. And so if the comms team is we don't have their capacity to help us, that could be another idea for us is, at least some of us can at least put the content or the copy kind of in draft form and then get that to the comms team. So that could be a way for us to still fulfill on that idea.
Okay. Thanks, Subin. Interesting idea, interesting approach to how we could structure council meetings. Your comment about what are the investments in early childhood, I think I've heard requests to build a children's agenda, finance agenda, children's budget for,
Comprehensive children's budget, Sue?
yeah, for 6,
Part of
8
Governor
years.
Kitzhaber's vision.
That goes way back to Governor Kitzhaber.
Yep.
Talking about it, so way back. And Subin, you're right. I mean, it would be great to have that children's budget available. I think would be really informative for all of our partners to see where they are investing. And it would take something bigger than we are.
It's pretty significant work, Subin. The governor's office back in 2011 took a first pass at creating a comprehensive children's budget with DAS leading it because the dollars live in so many different places. I'm blanking on the national organization, but there's been a push lately for fiscal mapping of investments from the federal level down because it's a mess at the federal level too in terms of where all the dollars sit. So that's something some states have embarked on, and there has been some legislative interest in that. But it's a really significant level of effort that would require the Legislative Fiscal Office, the DAS Chief Financial Office, and all of the involved agencies to pull and track. So it's a pretty significant undertaking. Every agency is required now to have a strategic plan, and we all have to present to Ways and Means on our budget. So, come this spring, every agency is going to have to break down how much each program is being funded and the progress of each program. So I think that's a natural data point that could be shared late spring when we're all done with our Ways and Means presentations, and also something we can make sure gets flagged for you all to tune in. DELC gets like 3 days. I think ODHS gets like 3 weeks. It really varies depending on the size of the agency and the budget. But at least at that high level, what's being funded, how many children are being served, who administers it, who can access it, what's the reach. That's part of our Ways and Means presentations. And in terms of, Marie, your comment on the plan, we've got a 60-page strategic plan that goes deeper than Raise Up Oregon into what DELC is going to do over the next 5 years. And every agency has to have at least a 3-year strategic plan as of June of this past year.
So, the council, I don't think we've ever really looked at your strategic plan, the DELC strategic plan, Alyssa. Is it broken into, year 1, 2, 3, 4? Or so would we see your priorities for 25?
We've got an internal team that's mapping, and so we should have a map. It's not in the plan itself, but our own internal working information on what's in flight, what's being developed. We're working on an external dashboard to reflect that. But the plan is organized by our goals, not by the years that the work could be completed. But that's something we could share for folks to have a deeper line of sight. I think I'll just name like attention that I've struggled with, having both been the council administrator and in the governor's office and here, is, when Raise Up Oregon was launched in 2019, there really was an intentional effort to not just be focused on the early learning division and emphasize the importance of the other sectors in the system. And I've felt this shift back to, well, let's just talk about DELC. And I know that's where the majority, obviously all we think about is early childhood, but I just want to name that tension that I've felt, knowing what the vision was 5 years ago and where we are now, knowing there's been a lot of shifts at many levels. And I'm not saying one's right or wrong, but I just want to put that in the room.
Yeah, really appropriate comment and sort of reminder for the council. Obviously, we spend a lot of time talking about cross-sector work with our agency partners. I'm sure it would be informative to have Gabby in all her spare time look at our 6 agency partners' strategic plans and then say, how do they align, or how are they different, whatever, from a obviously prenatal to 5 focus. That that could be a little daunting, but maybe something we should at least consider.
Or at least connect with Raise Up Oregon. I'm thinking, Sue, about like the calls Yumi and Miriam had with each agency director when the first iteration of Raise Up Oregon was created. And we started by, do you have a strategic plan and what are your priorities? And so even looking at, has Raise Up Oregon shown up in these strategic plans in some way, I think would be interesting to see like how much of an impact it's had, and finding those connections back, which I know is some of what Gabby and David and Carrie and Harriet were working on before.
Yeah, good reminder. I'd totally forgotten about that, Alyssa. Okay, thanks. Robin?
Thank you. I really appreciated all that you shared, Alyssa. I learned a little bit more each time we all meet together. And I think that instead of asking Gabby, could we ask the agencies, or your one-on-ones would probably be helpful, but ask them to come. It could be a whole early learning council meeting about cross-sector, is having agencies come and maybe it's not just the leads, but someone who oversees some of the work, talk about their portfolio in early childhood to help us understand better how they view themselves in Raise Up Oregon. And I think that the comment you made about the late spring, I think around budgeting, it would be great if we could also prioritize time to maybe dig in as a council a little bit at the high level of what the state agency budget, high level distillation of what comes out of those reports that they have to do for budgeting. I think that would be an interesting, right now I'm trying to help build our agendas for next year. So that's what I'm talking about. Building on priorities from last year. So, when we set priorities last year, I wasn't a council member yet when those were set. And yet each of those were important mile markers for us to be tracking on. And what is our approach to keeping our through line, like keeping that so that we don't just stop and start at the end of the year. And I know like our home visiting was a priority, and we'll continue, I assume, to get updates from the subcommittee. But if we had an intentional plan to like keep up those threads, I think that's really good to be building on what we have been doing. Regarding the alignment of SIC, the State Interagency Coordinating Council, is that right, Subin? Is that what SIC is? The State Interagency Coordinating Council. Children's System Advisory Council. So that on our list of priorities, it's ask state agencies to identify and recommend other agency councils or work groups. I wonder if that's like a task that might be something that we could either ask agencies to submit that's related to, and like Children's System Advisory might not stop at 5, but they do spend a lot of time in early childhood. But we could ask other agencies to identify groups that they think are linked to either a governor priority or a Raise Up Oregon. It'd be really nice if there was a one pager that showed all of the Oregon committees working together and how they're related. I mean, it's super interesting. And then my final comment is around the housing. And I just feel like there's so much learning for me to do. And I'm trying to look at it not through, and I think we all are, not through just co-location, but housing in terms of our vulnerable families birth to 5. So whether it's a presentation to help us learn how the funding from Medicaid funding for housing, ODHS funding around housing from the housing agency, but there are multiple funding streams that are related to housing depending on eligibility. And I feel like we could do a whole learning session about what those funding streams are. And again, maybe we dedicate time to what are the challenges and pitfalls, because I've been hearing in the community like, yeah, but that'll only be for this. And I think, gosh, I can't even track it all. Wouldn't it be great if we help to simplify so that we could use an early learning council to raise up the barriers and hear the successes? And also with the co-location, I know that there is an eye towards what that looks like in rural, but I still think there's a lot of learning to be done about really being willing to look outside the box of what do rural communities, frontier communities say would really be helpful in terms of co-location, because I think it is a very different body of work potentially. And so there's a lot of learning to do around housing. I think we could dedicate quite a bit of time around that. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Great comments. Just one comment on one of the first pieces you mentioned about for a meeting agenda to see what the agency's investments are in early childhood. And one of our thoughts is, the governor's recommended budget comes out December 1st, right, Alyssa?
The second this year, but yeah.
Okay, and our meeting is on December 11th. So we're thinking of asking our agency directors to share with us what is in the GRB that relates to early childhood, and just see what the governor is prioritizing in her budget for that. So yes, yeah. So good point, like really good points. And the through line from 24 priorities, I think that's something we can work on with Carrie and Harriet, especially, is just how do we show that? Because there certainly are through lines. And we can come up with some way to just connect 2025 to 2024 and show that we're on a trajectory, hopefully, for having some impact. Liz.
Yeah, I wanted to just circle back on the communication and capacity issues, and especially I appreciated Alyssa's comments about kind of that tension between the council. Is the council focused on DELC or focused on the broader system? And one of the things I was wondering, and this is just really more of a question, is there an opportunity especially on the communications capacity issue, to ask those agency partners to help carry some of the load so that it's not DELC's communication staff? Because I think part of the tension that I feel as well, Alyssa, is that your staff, to their credit, are the ones that are always at the table here. And so it's comfortable talking to your staff about, hey, could we do this? I don't feel like we have those same kinds of relationships with the other state agencies' staff. Like, I appreciate the directors are there, but I don't know who does comms for ODHS, like those aren't. So I think maybe that might help make this more of a system group, is to explore whether not just on the director level, but some of those other supports like comms, maybe there's more interagency partnership on messaging, on communication strategies that could also alleviate the capacity issues that DELC runs into in trying to support the council's work.
Yep, great question, Liz. Probably the best example of where that additional support from our partners comes is in the Raise Up Oregon Agency Implementation RUIACT implementation team. And they do meet monthly, and those are, managers in each of our agency partners. So they're really talking all the time about how can we all connect. And, I don't know that they've ever really talked about how can we communicate and the messaging that you're talking about, Liz. So that could be an interesting question to throw out to that group. And Carrie and Harriet and Alyssa just spent quite a bit of time together with them in Philadelphia, having dinner at Harriet's place, I think, right? Which would have been very fun. So excellent points. Other thoughts to throw out? I think our next step, and Carrie, maybe you can help with this, and Gabby, because you're going to be very, very involved in next steps, will be to Carrie, Harriet, Gabby, Alyssa, and I don't know who else will be meeting Thursday as usual to follow up this discussion and start putting together what I'm calling a work plan that may be a little too structured or official. But where does the council want to, where do we want to spend our time in 2025? You know, as I look at especially the matrix with council roles, you'll see, and I mentioned this earlier, there are a lot of check marks in the second column, which is the one around being a champion, which in many of these cases is translating into testifying and meeting with legislators. That's never, to my knowledge, been a real focus of the council in the past. So this would be a new focus for us, and one that we would certainly be relying on Gabby and some of our agency partners, government affairs folks, to keep us informed of where can we weigh in, where can we make a difference. And we'd spread that out among all of us as far as the testimony goes. But that is sort of it's a new piece, as I see it, of what the council formally would want to be working on in at least the first half of 2025. So just one observation. Carrie, do you want to talk a little bit about what you and Harriet maybe have been thinking?
Well, to be honest, I just came off the Philadelphia meeting, so I actually haven't had a chance to connect with you and Harriet. I mean, I think the things that we want to think about is the kinds of things that you raised here, and how do we map out the whole year, knowing the flow of the legislative session, where's the intensity for supporting on testimony, how do we want to use your monthly meetings given these priorities? We did last year try to map out which topics were going to fall when. We tried to anticipate what would be good timing. So then depending on that, depended on invitations to state agency directors that we might want to be with us for a little longer period of time, RUAC members who might prep. How do we identify community members? That took a lot of staff time, actually, the identifying community members, supporting them, preparation so that they felt well prepared to come into the conversation. So I think we do want to put together, given these priorities, what would the ebb and flow and how would that work, so that we would have a sense, Subin, of how jam-packed are your 5 hours together? Are we creating space for discussion, and how do we, spread the burden of the work out? I don't know, Sue, if you were thinking about some of the other strategies, but that was how do we translate today's conversation into the literal use of meeting time and supports around being a champion?
Right. Yeah, I think that is going to be our challenge.
Yeah.
And Peter, you may have some thoughts about that.
Yeah, I would hope that we'd actually look at the Momnibus bill as basically a scheduling factor. It seems to me it's kind of like a once in a lifetime, perhaps maybe not once in a lifetime, maybe there'll be another chance at 27, but we have a lot of attention being brought into the Momnibus bill. And I hope that as a council, we will make sure we leverage whatever abilities we have to help move that. If the bill can address housing, poverty, workforce, behavioral health, if that's the vehicle, I hope we organize ourselves around it to make sure that we stay engaged with it. And then one other points on communications, while we're talking about, the Momnibus really doesn't do anything on childcare, and I'm hoping that besides maybe well, right now it doesn't, but maybe we could look at our comm that we highlight positive things that are happening around the state, but we also use the phrase "the crisis in childcare" over and over and over again, because we have to raise this to a crisis level. If we don't raise it to a crisis level, I don't know who will, and it is a crisis in our state.
Yeah, it is a crisis, and I've been talking to some legislators, and Alyssa and I had a conversation yesterday, but trying to figure out how do we pull people together, because it needs to be a large table to address this crisis. And you'll see in the matrix and in the narrative, we put in, let's see, in the narrative, it's number 3. The council will create opportunities to further public-private partnerships to address the crisis. And we just listed, agencies, legislators, businesses, philanthropy, providers, advocates. I mean, it's a big table. And I went back and looked at the childcare task force that Reps Power and Taylor chaired in 2020. And there were a lot of providers and people in the system at that table, and it really did make a difference. If you look at the report, many of the outcomes have been implemented, but there weren't businesses at that table, and I don't remember philanthropy being there, but Robin may correct me on that. So I think the table needs to be big, and I think it's going to need to be staffed so that they can actually make recommendations and then have some, how do we move these forward so it isn't just a study. But certainly the one in 2020 really did have an impact. So I think we have a model there. Katie.
I agree with you, Sue. Couple of thoughts on that. One thought is, it would be great to have data, and that's another thing we can think about as an ELC. Be simple, it could be harder, but how many businesses have thought about weighing in on or supplying subsidization or building a childcare center on site, that sort of thing. We did that in Central Oregon a few years ago, just with a Survey Monkey, and we got 200 or 300 responses. We could do something like that, gather the data so we understand what the landscape is, and then pick some folks out for this and identify the obstacles. The obstacles that I know that I've heard are the regulatory hoops are pretty crazy for a business to jump through. You've got a break room and a conference room. There's just no way that's going to qualify for bringing in childcare. And that's one of the things that they think they can do to solve the childcare crisis for their people on site. And so what are the barriers? Where are the opportunities? Where are there not opportunities there? And the other thing is, there are a lot of businesses that we interviewed 2 years ago. 91% of the businesses that we interviewed, I think it was 230, something like that, in Central Oregon, meaning Bend and Redmond, 91% said the cost of living, that included housing and childcare, were the biggest barriers to attraction and retention of talent. Data like that helps. And then we also asked in that survey, we used Echo Northwest to do this one. So what are you doing about it? And we got a lot of answers. A lot of them are subsidizing childcare. They're just saying, look, here's your cafeteria plan. Pick out one. It could be $500 for childcare a month, or we're going to reduce your co-payments or our payments into your premium for healthcare, or we'll pay for you and your family, or we will help you with your monthly mortgage or rent payments. And they are being very, very creative. And it would be great to be able to find the businesses to come to that table who have been doing these things.
Yep.
To talk about exactly what is happening on the ground.
Great examples, Katie. What a great survey. You did that 2 years ago, you said?
Yeah, happy to share it with everybody.
Yeah, I'd love to see that.
If I could just add to what Katie said, I love what she said.
Yeah.
I would say, as someone who works in the private sector, a private sector business, obviously I'm on the philanthropic side, but right next to our business, if there's not sort of a understandable what the time commitment is you're asking for, and then what is going to be addressed because of their time, I think we just have to, I just want to put that out there that we should be really thoughtful. If we're asking them to sit at a table to give us input into how to solve a crisis that impacts them, that then we have a mechanism by which we can act on their recommendations.
Really good, really excellent point, Marie. And that's one reason why in this list of who needs to be at the table, we've got agencies and legislators. Because chances are a lot of what needs to happen will be at that level, whether it's through statutes or budgets or whatever.
And I think I would be remiss if I didn't also say that oftentimes the kind of capacity that's needed to serve at these tables is not found in rural advocates. So we want to be intentional in ensuring we have some rural champions in that mix.
Yeah, excellent point.
And I think the insurance component will be big, which is hard because there isn't necessarily an agency, but that's going to be key. The Oregon Talent Assessment did say that 42.5% of companies said that childcare is the challenge to employee retention. So there is some good state data we can build off of. One thing I can take back to the team and figure out our capacity, but we are working on making sure legislators understand the landscape, at least within DELC's purview. And so we are giving presentations on licensing, all of the programs we offer, and then the workforce and the supports that are given. And so I don't think taking an hour of a council meeting is necessarily the best use of time, but we'd be happy to work with folks. If anybody wants those kind of sessions, overview sessions, happy to work with Gabby and Sue on a way we could do something similar. It's really just the basics, knowing that when we get into session, we're not going to get an hour of anyone's time. So happy to share some of that information with folks just to get that grounding. But one of the components we're really anchoring to is this is a huge economic and workforce challenge. We also have a really good slide that shows we're one small piece of the system, and building and zoning have responsibilities. DCBS has responsibility. It extends beyond the DELC purview. And so if the council's interested, we'd be happy to work with Sue on the best way to bring that information forward.
I think that would be really, really helpful, Alyssa. It sounds great. And maybe what we could do is just set up, not in a council meeting, but just another time when council members could jump on a call and just see the PowerPoint and then ask questions of you and your staff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Those who are interested. And then I assume we could share the PowerPoint with anyone who wasn't able to get on the call.
Yeah, we could absolutely make that available. It's a lot of content we're really driving through, but happy to work on the best way to share that information.
Okay, and that would be really helpful for us to have the same grounding that the legislators are going to have as we start trying to have this be part of our messaging, as Liz was talking about, that we do have a childcare crisis and they need to be at the table to help solve it. And the point I think Marie made about, it takes some staffing to pull off, having this table be effective, which is why we may end up, and Peter, I'd be interested in your thoughts about this, but we may end up wanting to see if the legislature would fund a study group as they did in 2020, with legislators co-chairing it and getting agencies on it. And that whole list of people.
And that was a legislative task force. And what that means is that the legislature, so LPRO staffs it, the legislature co-chairs, and then agencies are members. And so you don't have, they worked with ELD at the time and other agencies for information, but LPRO really takes the lead on staffing if it's a legislative task force.
Okay.
Versus the 2727 work group, DLCD is staffing that work group, and there's legislator membership.
Okay, so there'll be some strategic thinking or talking about that. Okay, well, childcare yes, will stay high on our list. Other comments from council members? This has been super, super helpful. Questions? We meet next on December 11th. And as I said earlier, obviously following up this conversation will be a part of that agenda. And where do we go from here? What are we thinking? At least the first 6 months in 2025 might look like for council meetings and council championing our partners' early childhood issues. I think also at that meeting, we'll want to talk about communications and messaging and just see what ideas we might be able to come up with around that. And invite our agency directors to share with us what is in the governor's recommended budget for early childhood, which would show us at least what the governor is proposing to the legislature and hopefully what we would be backing in the session. Any other comments, concerns, whatever?
I know it's hard to kind of plan or think about this right now, but at the SICC meeting last week, there were 2 public comments from families concerned about the transitioning federal administration and their promise to collapse the Oregon Department of Education. And the concern is considering what the SICC is responsible for, which is parts B and C of the IDEA, that would be deleterious at best for early intervention and early childhood special ed. And I don't know how organized this group is, but it seemed like they were saying, we want to write IDEA into state law. We want to try and do what we can, knowing that the federal money that supports EIE, CSE will go away. And it's hard to make plans off of everything we talked about today was concrete to as concrete as possible, right? But I also worry about what's going to happen to Head Start, what's going to happen to Title I, what's going to happen to all the things that kind of live within ODE, not ODE, within the Department of Ed, federal, and what the implications could be. I think it would be cautious of us to at least have an idea of what might happen, what might happen in terms of funding stream. So I just want to put that out there. I don't want to create fear, but I think it would be wise for us to at least have some thoughts about what we would do or how the field will just change in a year or two.
We're as agencies having these conversations now. So I think if you can give us time to work with the governor's office on kind of the best way to share that information, but that isn't, we're all aware and doing our best to mitigate and affirming our commitment to our mission and our work. And we don't have no intention of deviating from that. So I would just say, if you can give agencies some time to work with the governor's office and as an executive branch to bring that information forward, I think we'll all be in a better position to do that in the next several months.
Right. I think we're all equally concerned, to say the least.
I have a question, Sue. I wondered, how do we as an early learning council committee, do we have any communication with the governor's office directly, or is it all indirectly through agency? It's like, do we have any report back requirements? What does that look like in terms of our expectation of this group?
Yes, the governor did ask us for recommendations, as you know, for children, or not in early childhood, but for children's budget and recommendations. So we gave her, if she's developing a children's agenda, we sent our priorities to her for that agenda. We'll see how they show up in her recommended budget in a couple of weeks. Alyssa is really our main connector through the policy advisor in the governor's office. I would say that's the main connector. And Alyssa, you may want to elaborate on that.
I think, yeah, I wouldn't say there isn't a formal report like SICC has to the governor. So there isn't a statutory requirement necessarily in that way. There's a lot of places where the council shows up as kind of advising. And then I think as the governor's office structure kind of evolves and shifts, Sue has been kind of one of the constant members whenever the governor's talking about early childhood, that Sue's included, so that we're able to lift up the council's perspective. But to Sue's point, I worked with the governor's office to let them know that you all would be sending recommendations over. So I kind of help coordinate the logistics on that front.
I guess one of the reasons why I'm wondering about it, I also serve on our regional solutions team for the South Coast. And so we're working with our regional solutions coordinator, I think probably as all regions across the state are, in terms of what are the regional priorities. And I can tell you that childcare and housing are 1 and 2. So I feel like I'd like to be able to figure out how, we don't need regional solutions to recreate a wheel, just like I serve on the Southwestern Oregon Workforce Investment Board, and I'm fully aware that statewide workforce partnership has childcare as one of their top priorities. So there are other sectors, even outside the Early Learning Council, I think, that are prioritizing childcare. And part of what I'm hopeful of is that there's a place in which these groups can coalesce, because I'm not sure it would be really helpful if we were all coming at the governor's office or our local legislators with our 5 priorities, and maybe everyone's 5 priorities are a little misaligned, and then there's no, how do you act on that in a way that actually benefits the system? So I just throw that out there in terms of ensuring that everybody who's sitting at this table, which I know you are aware, but these priorities are popping up outside the Early Learning Council, outside these agencies. How do we, I know we only necessarily have this space where this set of agencies comes here, but how do we do this in a way that sort of ensures that we're including these other sectors? Because I don't think it's beneficial for, one group to be going off on their own doing it. There's just a lot more power if we're more collaborative and have some similar goals and objectives. And I'm sure there's some similarities in obstacles as well as opportunities.
And I think that is a role that the council can play. One of our goals as an agency is to make sure at least legislators are aware that DELC exists, because there have been hearings where no one mentions that there's an agency that oversees childcare. And so as legislators say, we need to reduce barriers or whatever, there's no one saying, yeah, and there's an agency you should work with to start. And so that's part of why we're trying to do these roundtables, is to just let folks see what exists, what's existed actually for many decades, and now just sits in one agency. But I think the council can play a big role because of the relationships you all have, and also continuing to direct back to the council or directing to DELC as a kind of main point, or directing to your local hub, who's obviously connected to us in the council. Because I agree, I think folks have realized childcare is a problem and they want to solve it, but they don't know all the pieces. And so we are going to be much more effective if we can work together, and you all are in the community and have a much better sense of where it's showing up than we will at the state level.
So Marie, it's an interesting point. The regional solutions, it's been around for a long time. And I think they've had a real impact in some regions in different areas, different needs and challenges. Does your regional solutions team have a plan or a path forward on the childcare priority? I'm wondering, how are they approaching that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question because I don't even know how to advise them on what pathway to go, right? Where would I send them? Come to the Early Learning Council and share your priority. That's not going to make any change for them, right? Not dissimilar to the workforce group. Where do we send people who who identify, have ideas, want to be at the table for solutions that they know the table that they're sitting at is going to move forward in some way to create the change that they're looking for? Like, where does that exist? Because this group is bringing cross-sector groups together to talk about agency work, which I think there's a lot of value in, but where is the table where the folks who want to work on this issue, whatever it is on the issue, where is that table where then, you figure out which levers need to be pulled in order to make the changes they see need to be made, or maybe informed by others, you know what I mean? Like, where's that table? Because I wouldn't know where to direct people really to go.
I mean, I think you should direct them to Delk, because at a minimum, we do know the players that need to be in the conversation. And if we don't know about it, that means there's nobody at the table who can explain childcare licensing and the childcare system. You just have folks who know that childcare is in a crisis. So I think if you refer them to Gabby, we can start by understanding where they are and getting the right folks at the table and saying, oh, you're talking about this. Let me get this person at DLCD to join the conversation. Let me get this amazing person from zoning to talk about ways that they've removed this barrier. We're the ones that are triaging and holding that information, but we're not at every table in the community.
Can I just piggyback off of that? And I don't know how everybody's regional solutions has worked, but at least in ours, our regional solutions person does know who a DLCD is assigned to our region. But one of the things I wanted to throw out there, because I'm not sure, because Delk is so new, is how much, like our local person here, Nate, is if I call him and say, I need somebody from Business Oregon, he knows exactly who's assigned in our region to help me with that. And then that person, if he's not the right person within the agency, moves me to the right person in the agency. So I think if you have a good regional solutions person on the ground that knows their people, but I think maybe what I want to make sure that's happening, two things. One, I'm not exactly sure that the hubs and regional solutions are always coordinating and connecting. So there may be an opportunity to make sure that those regional solutions people are clued into what's happening within the hubs, because I think they could be a great resource to some of our priorities about bringing those agencies in to the work that the hubs are doing. And then two, also making sure that our regional solutions people know who to go to within Delk. I'm assuming they do, but given that it's new, I just wanted to kind of put that on the table, that if that loop isn't closed, and there's ways, for me locally, I've got 2 regional solutions people that I work with to help make those connections if we can do that as council.
And we can reach back out. Like, Nate's been a regional solutions coordinator for a really long time. And so he was working with us prior to us being Delk. But I know there's been more turnover in some of the other regions. And so we can also work to the governor's office and make sure we know who the current coordinators are and that we're making connections. But I think, if you all don't see anyone from Delk at the table in these conversations, asking your regional solutions coordinator to reach out to Gabby as like kind of your council liaison is a good starting point. And we can make sure that we're organized to support Gabby when those requests come through. But we'll make the outreach to the governor's office as well to make sure those connections are happening.
So I guess just an interim answer to the question could be at least give them Gabby's name, so that Gabby can then figure out where, whether it's in childcare licensing or wherever within Delk, the question should go. At least short term. And another piece of this childcare puzzle and crisis is that there are several very local focused efforts to support childcare providers. And you may be aware of them, but I know in Peter's area, Renee, the hub director whom we spent time with, has raised money in order to provide subsidies for families and to provide incentives for providers. And it's on a small scale, but they're really having very specific measurable outcomes of increasing the number of childcare providers. Same, I know, in Lynn Benton Lincoln. Christy has a program that is supporting childcare providers. So as I say, it's small, it's incremental, but they are having an impact now. So I don't think we want to just sit back and wait for some magic, huge response to the crisis. But I think we could, maybe it's part of our messaging, is to make sure that people are aware that there are these local efforts that are being successful. And Marie, I don't know if there's something down in the South Coast as well. Knowing Sarah, she's probably got some plan because she's pretty amazing, obviously. Katie.
I just wanted to say goodbye. Tomorrow is our biggest event of the year, and we have rehearsal right now. I've got to get to it. So we have 500 of my best friends coming. So I will see you guys. I
Awesome.
really, truly appreciate this conversation today.
Thanks
Bye.
for being with us, Katie. Have fun at it, I hope, with your 500 best
Yay.
friends.
Bye.
Yeah, Sue, I think it's not so much folks coming to Regional Solutions or Workforce with a particular project that they don't know how to move forward. I think it's in general, the system itself is in crisis and people want to figure out like, what are the things we can do to address it? Obviously, Business Oregon has taken a big lead in figuring out how to fund programs that help navigate people through the system of childcare. Again, that's a funding outlay that Business Oregon has done for areas around the state to help navigate people through childcare. But what I'm saying is there's these other, and I'm sure there's others that other people know of that I don't, that are like, we want to do something about childcare because it's such a crisis. And then it's like, they have either stories or things that are not working or opportunities that could work that, again, I hear what Alyssa's saying and sending them to Delk, but then where does that go? Like, where is the repository of, here are some of the things that could be addressed, and then how do they systematically get addressed? I mean, I would hate to send all these desperate groups to Delk if there's not a system that's ready for them to sort of have a table that's set. Otherwise, this can be a lot of meetings for you all for, I'm not sure what would be the outcome that would be, helpful for you or for them.
Depends on the topic and what exactly they're looking at investigating. So often the way we start is the regional manager for licensing is who kind of comes to the table, understands what challenge they're trying to solve, what issues they're exploring, and then comes back to us and says, okay, so I need to talk to this person with the hub. I need to talk to this person who understands CCDF. Then they come back and we coordinate to get the right information to them. One of the things that we're working on building with David's position, which we're currently recruiting for, if you know anyone, great, but is being able to leverage the policy team and help us develop capacity to take those best practices and other ideas that are working in other states and working in communities and bring that into our agency and help licensing or program or operations scale those strategies. So we don't. Our ideal is that we actually would have some positions whose job is to look at what Katie's been able to accomplish in Central Oregon and figure out how to scale that across the state. Right now, most of our positions are pretty much tied to programs or specific funding streams. So we don't have a lot of like generalists, but we want to start by leveraging David's position to kind of be that bird's eye view across the board, and then leverage our subject matter experts than the agency to actually help identify and scale solutions. So I know it looks like it just comes a Delk in a black box, but historically, when we're asked to come to a table, we come to a table and actively work to help those partners find solutions. And what we want to do is make sure we're tracking what those solutions were, so that if there's actually a state barrier that we have authority over, we remove it. And we have done that through our childcare licensing rules. And it's going to be one of our legislative concepts because we've found some statutory limitations that prevent us from being flexible in the ways we've been able to be flexible through rule.
Okay. Thanks, Alyssa. Speaking of Business Oregon, have you seen a report from their facilities project?
They will have notices of intent to award out by the first week of December. And so shortly after that, they'll have the breakdown of information, kind of what they've received. So they are actively kind of analyzing that data. I believe they had, I'll check my email, over close to 800 million in requests, which is not super surprising, given the need that we know is out there. And they're still doing the breakdown of kind of the types of applications they received. They got 738 applications, almost 300 million in requests. It varied pretty widely between property acquisition all the way down to new construction, minor repairs, or planning. So really across the board, the types of applications. And so we'll have those award announcements made by the first week of December. And then they'll be awarding projects in 28 different counties, it looks like, based on the applications received. And we'll be opening applications for round 2 in early 2025. But they'll have a deeper analysis and report later on.
Okay. So Alyssa and Gabby, when that report's available, will you send it out to council members?
Yep.
I think we'll all be very interested to see what that looks like. Yeah, 300 million and they have 25 million, right?
They have 50 million.
But
this round was only for 10 million. Yeah.
Okay. Jeez. Yes. All right. Other comments, questions? Robin, I just want to note the comment that you put in the chat about how we're working on equity in everything that we're considering. You're right. We need to make sure that we center conversations on equity, which obviously includes the urban rural as well as racial and economic and the many ways in which we can and need to look at equity. Okay, other questions, comments? Okay, well, thank you all very much for your time this morning, but mostly for your passion for this work and for your commitment in your own communities and what you do. It's fun working together, and we're going to have an exciting 2025, which we will set up on December 11th. All right. Thanks, you guys. Have a great day and have a happy Thanksgiving.
Take care.
Bye-bye.